The world had grown comfortable with its lies. Above the endless skyline of New York, enormous screens flickered with the porcelain smile of Homelander, promising safety to a city that no longer remembered what safety felt like. Vought International had perfected the art of manufactured worship, teaching an entire civilization to kneel before cameras rather than character. Behind every triumphant broadcast, corruption bled quietly through the streets, and fear wore the clothing of admiration. Then, without warning, the sky broke. A wound of crimson and black tore across the clouds above Manhattan, releasing a pressure the world had never known. It was not heat. It was not radiation. It was pure, ancient malice, older than nations, older than gods. Pedestrians dropped to their knees in the streets, gripped by a dread no scientist could measure. Even seasoned soups felt something primal crawl beneath their skin, a whisper their power could not silence. From the fracture stepped a figure carved from centuries of legend. Ryomen Sukuna, fully incarnated, descended into a world unprepared for his existence. His arrival had been born from a violent collision between cursed energy and the reckless experimentation of Compound V5, though he cared nothing for the reason. His crimson eyes swept the skyline once, and in that single glance he understood everything. There were no sorcerers here, no barriers, no warriors who could even perceive the true source of his strength, only arrogant children pretending to be gods. Across the city, silent horrors began. Neighborhoods reported hallucinations that bled into reality. Bodies were discovered cleanly severed, though no weapon could be found. Surveillance cameras dissolved into static wherever he walked. Vought scientists stared in disbelief as every sensor returned contradictions, as if reality itself refused to name him. At last, Homelander rose to meet him atop Vought Tower. He expected another desperate soup. Instead, Sukuna simply smiled, disappointed, unimpressed, almost bored. And before a single blow was thrown, he spoke. "So, this world's strongest is only this?" The insult had barely faded before Homelander moved. He struck with the speed that had shattered tanks and outrun missiles, unleashing the fury that had made him untouchable for 2 decades. Heat vision carved through the tower's crown. Sonic booms shattered windows for a mile. Yet Sukuna remained still, drifting between each strike as though the wind itself politely stepped aside for him. Every attack found only concrete, glass, and screaming bystanders below. For the first time in years, Homelander felt something unfamiliar tighten inside his chest. It was not pain, it was doubt. And doubt, in a mind built entirely on dominance, felt closer to suffocation. Sukuna studied him with the calm interest of a scholar observing a wounded animal, unimpressed by the ferocity, disgusted by the lack of discipline. News drones circled the battle, desperate for footage, but every camera dissolved into static whenever cursed energy warped the air. The public began to glimpse fragments of impossible truth, buildings sliced apart by invisible blades. A grinning figure untouched by explosions. For the first time, Vought's carefully manufactured narrative could not contain what people were seeing. In a warehouse across the river, Billy Butcher watched the chaos unfold with a rare silence. The boys had assumed the newcomer was another soup gone rogue. Frenchie disagreed. Compound V could not explain wounds without weapons, or victims dying without contact. Whatever this creature was, it belonged to a category science had not yet learned to fear. Meanwhile, Sukuna wandered the city between confrontations. He tasted the hypocrisy hanging in the air, sensing the cruelty behind every commercial, every rally, every smile. He did not wish to conquer this world. He wished only to observe how long it could pretend. Homelander demanded worship. Sukuna demanded nothing at all, and that made him infinitely more terrifying. That night, Homelander stood before every camera in the country and declared war on the intruder, vowing to end him live on television. Sukuna accepted without a word, curious to see how quickly false gods crumbled. The city changed in ways no one could name. Streets touched by cursed energy grew heavier, as though the air itself carried grief. Ordinary civilians woke drenched in sweat from dreams they could not remember, only feel. Children stopped speaking in certain neighborhoods. Dogs refused to enter certain rooms. A slow, invisible rot was spreading through the bones of the world. Vought's analysts blamed Sukuna. They were wrong. His presence had not created the sickness. It had awakened it. Humanity had always carried hatred, cruelty, and despair inside itself, but this universe had never possessed a catalyst strong enough to give those emotions form. Now, cursed energy was rising from the ground like steam, drawn out by the shadow he cast simply by existing. Deep in a stolen laboratory, the boys uncovered a truth more disturbing than any battle. Compound V did not resist cursed energy. It amplified it. Every soup on the planet was becoming a conductor for something older and hungrier than their creators had ever imagined. Across the world, celebrated heroes began to unravel. A-Train ran until his legs burned to ribbons. The Deep laughed at nothing for hours. Black Noir stopped moving entirely. Homelander refused to hear any of it. He smiled harder for the cameras, spoke louder at rallies, insisted the world was safer than ever. But at night, alone in his penthouse, he found himself listening for footsteps that were not there. Sukuna did not attack him. He did something far worse. He talked to him. On rooftops, in empty studios, in the reflection of shattered glass, the curse dismantled the myth of Homelander piece by piece. He argued that Homelander's greatest weakness was not compassion, but insecurity. Every rescue, every speech, every murder disguised as heroism was only another desperate attempt to convince himself he deserved worship. The words landed harder than any strike. Homelander's rage began to leak into the world. Cars crushed by accident. Assistants incinerated by a glance. His collapse became visible, and his collapse fed the growing hunger in the air. Then Sukuna felt it clearly for the first time. Newborn curses stirring across the globe, small, formless, patient. Every manufactured tragedy Vought had ever created was becoming food. And this world, he realized, might soon birth horrors even he could not predict. The final confrontation was announced like a coronation. Vought promised the world a spectacle of redemption, a live broadcast in which their greatest hero would prove that no force, human or otherwise, could stand above him. Cameras lined every rooftop. Fleets of drones circled the sky. Billions watched from their screens, whispering prayers to a hero who had already begun to unravel from within. Homelander descended from the clouds with the full weight of his myth behind him. His eyes burned brighter than they ever had, fueled by desperation disguised as confidence. Sukuna stood alone in the center of a ruined avenue, hands folded behind his back, waiting with the patience of something eternal. The first exchange leveled 6 city blocks. Homelander struck with everything he had, faster than sound, hotter than the surface of a sun. And for a single breath, Sukuna allowed him to feel the illusion of progress. Then the world folded. Malevolent shrine bloomed around them, an infinite cathedral of bone, altar, and quiet slaughter. Distance became meaningless. Defense became decoration. Invisible blades cleaved through steel, glass, and the bodies of anyone unlucky enough to remain nearby. Homelander watched entire streets fall apart in perfect geometric wounds, and he understood finally that invulnerability meant nothing when reality itself was being cut. Yet he refused to fall. His body was engineered beyond mortal design, and even against techniques meant to sever existence, he endured. Blood ran freely down his flawless face for the first time in his life. Sukuna's smile flickered, not with pleasure, but with genuine interest. The clash stretched longer than he expected, each exchange rewriting the skyline. Around them, the curse outbreak devoured the city. Faceless creatures crawled from alleyways. Screaming voices rose from empty apartments. The boys arrived not to protect Homelander, but to keep the world from ending with him. Butcher understood, with sickening clarity, that killing either monster now would change nothing. The infection had passed beyond both of them. Sukuna paused, and in that pause he understood too. This universe no longer needed him to teach it fear. It had already learned. He turned his final strike into something crueler than death. He broke Homelander in front of every camera, in front of every worshiper, in front of every child who had ever believed in him. He left him alive, bleeding, kneeling, and stripped of the only thing he had ever loved, dominance. Then, as the fracture in the sky reopened, Sukuna walked toward it without looking back. In the days that followed, civilization tried desperately to remember what it had seen and forget it at the same time. Vought's public relations machine worked around the clock, rewriting the disaster as an isolated terrorist incident, a rogue soup, a foreign attack, anything except the truth. But the truth had been broadcast to the entire world, and no amount of editing could unwrite the images burned into the collective mind. Homelander survived, though the man who once ruled the skies did not. He walked through Vought Tower in silence, flinching at reflections, listening for footsteps behind empty doors. His smile still appeared on billboards, but his eyes no longer matched it. Somewhere beyond this universe existed a being who had regarded him not as a rival, not as prey, but as entertainment. That knowledge sat inside him like a splinter that could never be removed. The boys understood something even Vought could not admit. Sukuna had not been the disease. He had been the diagnosis. Humanity's cruelty, its worship of power, its endless appetite for spectacle, had been generating cursed energy long before he arrived. Now that seed had taken root, and it would grow whether the world acknowledged it or not. Reports began surfacing from every continent. Invisible attackers in quiet suburbs. Massacres without suspects. Children speaking calmly to figures no one else could see. Priests weeping in empty churches. Scientists unable to explain sudden deaths in perfectly sealed rooms. Without ceremony, without warning, this universe had entered the first age of curses. High above the healing sky, the dimensional rift closed slowly, like a wound learning to scar. Sukuna glanced back only once. There was no regret in his eyes, only satisfaction. He had not conquered this world. He had simply shown it what monsters truly looked like, and left it to become one. Homelander believed strength made him a god. Sukuna understood that true monsters are not measured by power, but by the fear they awaken in others. And somewhere in the darkness below, one small curse smiled, patient, waiting. Was Sukuna the invasion, or merely the beginning?